The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello, and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This special bonus episode is going out midweek because I'm pretty sure a lot of you have questions and concerns about things that are happening in the United States these days, and events are happening so quickly, I didn't want to delay getting this information out to you. I do not have a podcast that reaches a lot of people, and it may seem self-important to think I have something so important to say that I have to rush it out to you. Maybe so. But in my world, silence is complicity. Every day that goes by is another day that we are not pushing back, and I need to do my part, however small it might be. Disturbing actions on the part of our government seem to have no real rhyme or reason, and many of you may be wondering why some of this is happening. Why are immigrants suddenly a threat to our national security? And why is this administration feels it has to violate every law and precedent to round up nonviolent, non-criminal brown people and ship them off to prisons in foreign countries or our newly opened concentration camp in Florida? Well, none of this is actually random or just bullies being bullies. There are plans and there are goals in mind. It just so happens that Donald Trump, our president, isn't the one who has put together or even understands what those strategies are. To him, as long as he's getting the spotlight and the attention his personality craves, he's happy to do whatever his advisors tell him needs to be done, including violating every law of our nation, ignoring our courts, and basically acting like a banana republic dictator. This is the most un-American administration to have ever had power in our country. If these words upset you, I hope they will also inform you. It is not my goal to trigger you or make you afraid. It is my goal to point out that history doesn't always repeat, but it does echo. And we are hearing deafening echoes of what authoritarians in the past have done to burn down civil and legal freedoms our fathers and grandfathers fought and died to protect. I say enough is enough. So today, we're going to dive into a critical conversation about the state of democracy and free speech in America, the rising influence of Christian nationalism, and the alarming effort underway by the Heritage Foundation through something called Project Esther to suppress dissent and restrict basic rights like assembly and protest. To help us unpack all of this, I'll be talking with Dr. Clint Heacock, a former evangelical pastor who has been a friend of this show for many years and has helped us dive deep into what we may have thought were fringe elements in our society that were trying to grow Christian cults of influence and control. He and I have had many discussions about the rising threat of Christian nationalism. Never before have our worst fears been more manifest than they are today. But before we get into that interview, I want to lay out some background because understanding where we are today requires us to see the historical and ideological forces that brought us here. Let's start with Christian nationalism itself. At its core, Christian nationalism is an ideology that says the United States was founded to be, and should continue to be, a distinctly Christian nation. It goes far beyond personal faith. It's not just about individuals following Christ. It's a belief that American identity and destiny are tied up with Christianity, that our laws and government should explicitly reflect Christian doctrine, and that Christians deserve a privileged place in public life. Surveys by organizations like the Public Religion Research Institute show that roughly 30% of American adults today fall into this camp. About 10% are hardline adherents, They strongly agree that the U.S. should declare itself a Christian nation, that our laws should be based on the Bible, and that moving away from Christian foundations would doom the country. Another 20% are sympathizers, leaning toward those ideas. That translates to about 78 million Americans, with roughly 26 million who fully endorse this ideology. Now, here's the paradox. Christian nationalism is actually less popular than it was 50 years ago. In the 1970s, fundamentalist Christianity was much more widespread, particularly in the South. And the idea that America was a Christian nation was taken for granted by many more people. Over the decades, the country has become more secular and religiously diverse. Today, nearly 30% of Americans have no religious affiliation at all, up from just 5% in 1972. And many mainline Protestant and Catholic communities have moved away from overtly nationalist or theocratic ideas. So how do we explain the fact that Christian nationalism, despite being less popular overall, has become far more politically powerful, directly influencing federal legislation, state laws, and even our foreign policy? The answer lies in organization, strategy, and intensity. Over the past 50 years, Christian nationalist leaders and institutions have become incredibly well organized, focused, and determined. Starting in the late 1970s with Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority, they created a sophisticated infrastructure to turn out voters around wedge issues like abortion, LGBTQ rights, and prayer in schools. They built massive media ecosystems, from televangelist networks to Fox News to algorithm-driven social media bubbles. They focused on grooming judges through groups like the Federalist Society to stack the courts with sympathetic figures. And they've benefited enormously from structural advantages, like the Senate and gerrymandering state legislatures, that give disproportionate power to less populated, more conservative regions. It's a textbook case of what we could call minority rule through intensity. A smaller group, if highly motivated, single-issue driven, and backed by enormous resources, can exert outsized control over the country's political direction. There's also a particular strand of Christian nationalism that's important to highlight here, and that is called Christian Zionism. Christian Zionists are Christians, mainly evangelical Protestants, who believe that the modern state of Israel is a direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy. In their view, Jewish return to the land of Israel is a prerequisite for the second coming of Jesus. Supporting Israel politically, financially, and spiritually becomes not just foreign policy, but a divine mandate. This is not a fringe belief. Even if you have never heard of it, that doesn't mean it's not a very real threat to you directly. The largest Christian Zionist organization in the U.S., Christians United for Israel, claims over 10 million members. Broader estimates suggest that 20 to 30 million Americans, largely evangelical, embrace Christian Zionist theology. Polls show that 80% of evangelicals see the 1948 founding of Israel as prophecy fulfilled. This belief system heavily shapes U.S. foreign policy, fueling unwavering support for Israel, often at the expense of Palestinian rights and broader Middle East diplomacy. Historically, Christian Zionism grew out of 19th century British evangelical movements, spread through American revivalist preaching, and was supercharged after 1948 and especially 1967, when Israel's dramatic military victories seemed like direct biblical signs. Over the decades, this became tightly woven into the worldview of Christian nationalists, linking American exceptionalism to Israel's fate. All of that brings us to Project Esther, the Heritage Foundation's recent blueprint to suppress pro-Palestinian activism and protests here in the U.S. Project Esther is explicitly shaped by Christian nationalist and Christian Zionist architects. The team behind it includes figures like Victoria Coates and Robert Greenway, who are part of the Christian nationalist wing of the Heritage Foundation. It also includes Mario Bramnick, who heads the Latino Coalition for Israel and belongs to the New Apostolic Reformation, a radical charismatic movement that fuses end times prophecy with political dominion. These leaders see unwavering support for Israel as a biblical requirement. Project Esther seeks to criminalize or severely restrict what it labels anti-Israel activity, effectively equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism and pushing for harsh penalties against students and activists. Its authors propose denying visas, deporting foreign nationals who protest Israeli policies, and pressuring universities to crack down on demonstrations, even peaceful ones. The goal is to weaponize the state to enforce a specific religious nationalist agenda that serves their theological vision of Israel while undermining foundational American rights like free speech and assembly. This is how we end up with the disturbing paradox we see today. Even as the broader American public becomes more secular and less interested in fusing religion with politics, an organized, theologically driven minority has managed to entrench Christian nationalist, and specifically Christian Zionist, priorities into U.S. law, foreign policy, and now direct crackdowns on civil liberties at home. So that's the backdrop for our conversation today. We're going to talk with Dr. Clint Heacock about how Christian nationalism evolved into this powerful force, how Christian Zionism fits into that story, and how Project Esther represents a chilling new chapter, one where the fusion of religion and state power is being used not just to shape policy overseas, but to silence dissent and erode core democratic freedoms right here in the United States. I know this seems like a lot. Maybe this is all totally new to you. You certainly don't hear much about this on the nightly news, and the powers that be are working very hard to make sure you don't. The last thing authoritarians and religious extremists want is an informed population. They want to stay in the shadows and do their work outside the spotlight, so you keep thinking there are other reasons for what is going on. While we fight each other over matters that don't really mean anything and which are not the causes of our problems, they laugh at us and think we're stupid chumps who can be pushed aside. I'd like to think we're a lot more than that, and I hope you agree with me. Stick around. This is a conversation you do not want to miss. Okay, hello, Dr. Clint Heacock. Welcome back to the Speaking of Cults podcast. I'm very happy to have you here. I am not very happy about what we're going to be talking about today. This is very serious stuff. This is very current, right now stuff. These are things that are developing very, very quickly, and we're trying to give some explanation about some of what's going on. Project Esther is one aspect of a bigger picture of the Trump administration and how it is carrying out I've been calling it a sort of proto-authoritarian activity, which is very rapidly moving over into full-on authoritarian activity. Clint, do you want to start with telling us what is Project Esther and why? What does this have to do with us?
Right. So thanks for having me on the show, Chris. We did a thing not too long ago about this, I think, and on my show, and now we're doing it on yours because more information has come to light. I've done more research on this. So if people have never heard of Project Esther, you will have heard of Project 2025, which we've done a lot of episodes dating back to, I think it was July or August of last year, once this became a news story. So, of course, Project 2025 is the brainchild of the Heritage Foundation, which is a far right conservative think tank that's been advising presidents since the Reagan era. And these people put out every year, they put out this mandate for leadership. And this is what most conservative presidents use as their policy playbook. And Trump used it his first administration. And we were trying to warn people a year ago saying, hey, if Trump gets elected, he's going to enact Project 2025. And of course, he lied and said, what? I never heard of it. What? Never heard of the Heritage Foundation. But what we've since found out, well, A, he's imposed a tremendous amount of Project 2025 policy recommendations, which we've already covered. But B, there's this new thing called Project Esther, which is also coming out of the Heritage Foundation. What it is, it's only I think it's a 33-page policy recommendation paper, and they put it out on October 7th, 2024. Now, the reason that date is significant is because that marks 1 year to the day of the Hamas attacks in Israel, October 7th, 2023. Okay. Now, on the face of it, it's about combating anti-Semitism. And they say, the scourge of anti-Semitism, we need to battle against anti-Semitism. And at first you might think, okay, yeah, I'm not an anti-Semite. I don't want to be anti-Semitic. I don't want anyone else to be anti-Semitic. So in principle, you think, yeah, this could be a good thing. But when you get into it, which the research I've done, it's basically about weaponizing anti-Semitism. If people want to take a quick takeaway, the key to understanding Project Esther is it's about weaponizing anti-Semitism to strip away people's constitutional rights. And that's essentially this is what Trump is enacting right now. And a lot of the immigration, the crackdowns by ICE, yes, that's part of his larger immigration policy, but a big part of it is this Project Esther. So anyone who speaks out against Israel, what Israel's doing in Gaza, or is pro-Palestine, if you go to a march or a rally or a demonstration against what Israel's doing on a human rights level, you are instantly labeled anti-Semitic. And you can be arrested, deported, detained illegally without due process. If you're a foreign student, we've seen this in many universities, they have been arrested and deported without due process because they were labeled anti-Semitic, because they spoke out against Israel. And that's where the weaponization of anti-Semitism comes into play.
Okay. And when people are being arrested for pro-Palestine or for, saying, hey, maybe all these women and children shouldn't be being killed and hospitals shouldn't be being bombed and, Israel shouldn't be carrying out its, persecution of Gaza and the citizens there. This is what is being interpreted as quote unquote anti-Semitism. So they're laying a pretty broad brush with this. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's it's a carrot and stick thing. Like I said, on the face of it, you think, okay, yeah, I want to combat anti-Semitism. I'm not supportive of anti-Semitism. But then when you dig into it, you find out it's a smokescreen. What they're doing is they're stripping people's, rights to assembly, rights of freedom of speech, right to, foreign students in the United States. They're being denied at places like Harvard and Columbia. And then if you speak out, you could be arrested, deported. And we've seen this on videos. I mean, you've seen videos of students being arrested on the streets by plainclothes ICE agents without a warrant, without any identification, putting them in a plainclothes or an unmarked vehicle, and they're gone. They're just disappeared. And it was all because they may have written an article in the school newspaper or participated in a march or a demonstration. And this isn't just limited to students, foreign students. We see now faculty members. If you write something, a position paper, or you put something on social media, they can go after you. They can get you fired. They can get you even arrested and detained for being quote unquote anti-Semitic just because you spoke out against what Israel's doing. Or you said, maybe not even that, you just said, I support Palestine. You're anti-Semitic.
Right.
It's just a crazy leap of sort of illogic from one to the next. You can't exercise your free speech. You're anti-Semitic. It's like, whoa, how did you get from A to Z just that fast? And that's how they do it. They get out that broad brush and suddenly you're anti-Semitic.
Wow. And this all stems from this position paper put out by the Heritage Foundation. Now, who We'll just name a few names here just so people can look this up for themselves. Who are the architects of this thing? Because let's name some names as far as who's putting this stuff together and saying this is a good idea.
So we know for sure the one who oversaw the project is a woman named Victoria Coates, and I think you've done some research on her. Another name is a guy named Robert Greenway, who ran something called the Abraham Accords. So he was one of the co-authors, and I think you found there's a third person, isn't there, that was involved with it?
Yeah, this guy, Daniel Flesch, he's a former Israeli diplomat.
Right.
And one of the only people who is actually Jewish, by the way, that is connected with this. Can you speak to that for a second? Because I found it striking that there are no American Jewish groups or even international Jewish groups that I think you laid out who are behind this or who are supporting this or who want this. And in fact, many have spoken out against it, saying this is not fighting anti-Semitism. This is something else entirely. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing. So that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Victoria Coates is part of the Trump administration, and she is someone who has an art degree. She's an art major. You can look her up. She's somebody who basically got into Donald Rumsfeld's orbit, our former defense secretary, I believe, and helped him write his biography. And so then she kind of got a little ticket into the world of Ted Cruz and Rick Perry and strategic assessments of the Middle East, which she had no background or education in, and now has become part of the Heritage Foundation think tank activity, and apparently is one of the chief architects of this Project Esther. I find this to be disturbing, to say the least, because these are not professional people when it comes to what it is that they're asserting. So that's not cool.
Yeah, that's problematic. And this, I don't know much about the Abraham Accords, but from my research, it has to do with, it was a deal brokered between Israel and some of the Arab states. And that was part of what it was about. It was something that, it was a Trump, well, not a Trump initiative, but he was participating in it. So I don't know how much this Robert Greenway knows about it, but that's interesting. Like you said, there's one Jewish person on this sort of three people person panel who wrote the paper. But as you say, what triggered it right away for me was the fact that who wrote it, it's basically was written by Christians, evangelicals, Christians, Zionists, which we talked about, I think, on my episode. And what gives the lie away that they say, well, Jews must support Project Esther. No, actually, there are not even a single Jewish group except for one conservative Jewish group out of New Jersey that does support it. But weirdly, they're like a Christian Zionist or Christian nationalist Jewish group. It's really strange. They're the only, and they're a fringe group. All the other mainline Jewish organizations not only don't support Project Esther, as you say, they denounced it. They've said, wait a minute, we are not backing this. In fact, a lot of Jewish groups are speaking out in favor of Palestine. And they're saying, wait, you're going to call us anti-Semitic? We're Jewish. Wait a minute. You can't call us anti-Semitic. Wait a minute,
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Let's speak to this for a second, because you've said something that I think is actually really core to understanding what's actually going on. Christian Zionism. Now, this is an odd term. What Christian Zionism? Now, we have talked about it before, but for this episode, let's define this clearly. And let me remind everybody that Dr. Heacock is someone who has a doctorate in religion,
theology, religious studies.
Former evangelical pastor. This is a man who swam in this world, understands this world. So that's why I love talking to him about this stuff. Is he has a very solid religious background and upbringing. So, what is Christian Zionism?
Yes, it's basically a belief that, and there's many different streams of it, but kind of the core theology is Christians, evangelicals, believe that Israel has to be in possession of their land, the physical land of quote unquote Israel, the land that was promised to them as they read the Hebrew Bible by God to Abraham. I mean, we're going back, thousands and thousands of years ago. And of course,
this is Old Testament material.
Yeah, this is straight out of the book, literally the first book of the Bible, Genesis. God promises Abraham the land of Canaan, which is modern day Israel. And there's a whole backstory. In fact, if people are interested in this, I know this is a side note, but go ahead and look up on YouTube the Skeptics and Seekers podcast, because me and David Johnson, he's the host, we just did an episode the other day on this issue of God commanding the Israelites to commit genocide in the Old Testament. And this is all related to Christian Zionism, because they have to defend that whole passage in books like Joshua and so forth when the Israelites come into the land, because God promised that land to Abraham. So when Israel was granted its nation status, and that was in 1948, wasn't it? After World War II by Britain, because it was a British colony, basically Palestine up to that point. Christians were ecstatic. They said this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Nowhere in history has a people group been alienated from their homeland for thousands of years and then come back to reclaim it. And they were just overjoyed. And I could remember when I was an evangelical hearing that same argument, and I was like, wow, that is amazing that this is true. No nation in history has come back to reclaim its land. And that's tied with end times events, because it has to do with what we call eschatology, which is a theological term, which means the sort of doctrine of end times, or the last days, the end of the world. So if the Jews are in their homeland, this is where Jesus is going to return to. That's where the Battle of Armageddon is going to be fought, between the forces of Jesus and the forces of Satan, the final battle, so to speak. Then there's going to come the end of the world. So there's a whole huge Christian theological end times wrapped up in all that. That's why it's so important that the Jews have to be in the land of Israel. So America must support Israel, because there's a verse in the Bible. Listen to what God told Abraham: whoever blesses you, I will bless. Meaning, in the nation of Israel, whoever curses you, I will curse. So Christian nationalists look at that verse and they say, aha, okay, so if we bless Israel, quote unquote, we support Israel, God will bless us as a nation. So therefore, and if we don't support Israel, God will curse us. So the right side to be on is the side of Israel. So God will bless us. So it's connected to Christian nationalism as well, because of course they see America as a Christian nation, and what a good Christian nation should be doing is supporting Israel, so that God can bless America. You see, it all somehow works out in the end for everybody.
Okay, and that is actually not a sideline piece of information to just kind of park and forget about. What you just said or described is core to what is driving right now American foreign policy having to do with Israel. People are aghast right now at the very militaristic, and some have described as genocidal moves of Netanyahu, the man who kind of runs Israel. And why, how, in what justification could exist to do this, to bomb hospitals, to kill innocent people? Well, if the Jewish people in Israel have their view of their place and their land, and it's religious and cultural and social. It's a whole mix of things. But Americans, we're talking about, who are supporting this. When we talk about Christian nationalists and Christian Zionists, this is a religious crusade.
Yeah.
And so what we're looking at here is the backbone of this is a religious persecution, a religiously driven persecution of anybody who supports what is perceived to be Israel's enemies. Because Israel must stand and the Jewish people must be there so that Jesus will return.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mentioned that in our last podcast. That was why Trump evangelicals were so ecstatic in his first administration when he moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, because they interpreted that as another sign of biblical prophecy being fulfilled. That basically it's saying the United States recognizes Jerusalem, the spiritual home of Christianity and Islam. They don't like the Islam part, but they have to admit that, and Judaism. The three Abrahamic religions all come from Jerusalem, but by the United States saying we recognize Jerusalem as the sort of capital of Israel, is a Jewish state. It's not an Arabic state. It's not anything else. It is a Jewish state. And the evangelicals were ecstatic. And I was going to say, even the recent attacks in Iran, Okay, that's interpreted. There was two things that happened. Israel attacked Iran first, and then later Trump ordered this strike by the B-2 bombers with
Yeah.
these bunker buster bombs. They interpret that. Evangelical said, on the one hand, Iran and the surrounding Arabic nations have been trying to destroy Israel, therefore wiping them off the map, which we cannot allow. So the U.S. has to fund Israel. We have to supply weapons. So, and they say, we can't allow that. And then America's like, well, we're going to jump in. And then the other thing that was interesting was that evangelicals were freaking out that this was the end time. This was Armageddon. The war that seemingly was about to start between Iran and now not just Israel, but the United States as well. When we bombed Iran, evangelicals, if you watched on social media, they were freaking out. Is this the end time? Is this Armageddon? Is this the beginning of the end? Is the end times coming soon? Is Jesus coming back? So every
Right.
time there's a big kickoff war type thing in the Middle East, this is what Christians do. They think this is the end times. I remember when I was a pastor, the first Gulf War, people were coming into our church in Portland, literally off the street, just complete, strangers asking, like, I need to speak to a pastor right now. Okay, what's your problem? Okay, this war in the Middle East and Iran, is that, or Iraq, is that the end times? Is this the beginning of the end? Even, non-Christians were so
Right.
steeped in that belief system and culture, even they were coming into our church in Portland to ask me, is this what the Bible refers to in the book of Revelation and places like that? This Gulf War. And that was the first Gulf War. So this is a pattern that we see within not just evangelicalism, but just Americans generally, because it's been so steeped in the culture.
Well, it's and these are important points for sort of the psychological religious underpinnings of this, because 75% of Americans, even to this day, with the increases in secularism and atheism and that kind of thing, we're still dealing with 75% of Americans are Christian. They're raised in a Christian household, Christian beliefs, and there's this core group of evangelical believers, these Christian nationalists and Christian Zionists, we can talk about these labels, who are really hardcore about these beliefs. They memorize them as children. They are punished for not getting it all down rote. I mean, we talked at length about your upbringing, and I've interviewed many other people who were raised in
Yeah.
evangelical households who, you spare the rod, you spoil the child, and so this is laid in with physical abuse at a very young age, where critical thinking is just simply not allowed. So the ability to escape that mindset, or to put it aside and just be rational, or just, oh no, I'm going to think about this in a very objective way, is just entirely missing from the minds of an awful lot of Americans. And so this end times, this eschatology mindset it is a strong one, and it drives
Oh
an
yeah.
awful lot of behavior. And of course, Michelle Bachmann comes to mind as a
Yeah.
former congressperson who was hardcore into this stuff, and turns out Stephen Miller worked for her on his way on up the road. Right, there's
Mm.
a what we could easily and accurately describe as a rabidly intense point of view that anything that brings about World War III, an Israel-centric World War III, is something that must be supported
Yeah.
and pushed for. Because people are like, well, nobody wants war. No, these folks do, and it's because of an interpretation of current events against the Old Testament, but also against Revelation. Could
Hmm.
you explain that a little bit? Because the part that really threw me was, these are not pro-Jewish people. These Christian Zionists are not, oh yeah, the Jews are going to have their Holy Land and we're going to support them in that. They're coming at this from a Christian perspective, where this is all about the rise of Christianity and the return of Jesus. Am I reading that right?
Yes, and that's the ironic thing that Christian Zionists and Christian nationalists don't want you to know about, is that they think, well, they say most Jews living in the current state of Israel today they're certainly not Christians. Maybe they're more secular than anything. If anything, they're going to be observant to the practices of Judaism. But in Christian Zionism, the belief is that all Israel will be saved. So their view is, at some point, the whole nation of Israel, or the majority of Jews living in the land of Israel, will become Christians. And the ones who don't are not going to be part of the kingdom of God. So if you're Jewish listening to this going, wait a minute, what did you just say? Christians really believe that there's going to be this en masse conversion of the Jews. They're going to suddenly realize somehow through a miracle of God or the Holy Spirit or something that Jesus, in fact, was the true Messiah of the Jews and not just the Gentiles, all the rest of it. And they're going to become saved. There's going to be this mass sort of repentance and revival. And then that's going to be a precursor to the end. So bad news for any secular Jewish person living in Israel right now. Guess what? If these end times events are going to come out and play into play like these Christians believe, you're going to have to become a Christian before it happens. And if you don't, you can get killed, or you'll be swept up in the the end times Armageddon battle on the wrong side.
Right. Well, this is important to understand, because, and I wanted to start with kind of laying this foundation for this so that it was clear that we're not talking about something that is purely political, and we're not talking about something that is just racist or bigoted towards brown people. That is the shallowest possible take of what's going on here. This is a religious crusade. And it really drives the thinking of, the architects of this stuff, the people who are putting this stuff together, these Christian nationalist groups who are the backbone of the Heritage Foundation and the planning and policies and executive orders and position papers and all the rest that are the Trump administration and what it's doing. Yeah. These are the people who are doing that work. You have to take out of your head that Donald Trump is some kind of mastermind or gives a crap about any of this. None of this that we're talking about, if we even tried to explain any of this to him, it would just go all over his head. He couldn't care less about any of this. No. He's in it for him. And the thing is, they know that. They see him, according to the papers and the articles that you were pulling from, that when you were briefing me on this, he's considered a Cyrus. And I need you to explain who that is and what that's in reference to, because this is how Trump gets a pass on everything and anything he does, no matter how licentious, illegal, horrible, immoral. They don't care, because Trump is the thing that empowers them to realize their goal of Christian nationalism. And so they look at him not as a spiritual leader of a moral character or deep belief, because they know he's not that. But they pray for him, they stand over him, they thank God that he is here and that he is leading this charge. But what is this charge, and who is Cyrus? Who's this person they see him as?
Well, I was going to say, before I answer that question, one thing you said, I was going to quickly go back. Sure. You're absolutely right. It's the theology of Project Esther, the Christian Zionism piece. That's what when you unravel it and trace it back to its core, the reason you can't speak out against Israel is because that's what they're saying is we must unreservedly support Israel.
Right.
Because we're Christian Zionists. The theology drives the worldview. So if you speak out and say, wait a minute, this is a human rights violation, this is a genocide, whatever you call it, that is critical of Israel. And that is not going to be allowed, because we have to support Israel. So that's the connection, which you put your finger right on it. It's the theology that's actually driving Project Esther. It's not really about combating anti-Semitism, full stop. No, it's about stopping people from criticizing Israel, and we must support Israel. That's how I see it. But going back to the other question, okay, who was Cyrus? This is another Old Testament reference. If you look at the history of the Jews, the Israeli race, they were in exile in Babylon. They went into exile about 586 BC. They were destroyed by Babylon, and they lived in Babylon for about 70 years. And then the Babylonians were overthrown by the Persian Empire. And so a lot of the Jews came to live in what became the Persian Empire. And this is where the book of Esther, we didn't talk about that, but the biblical
Oh no,
book of
we were going to
Esther.
get to it, so
Okay, yeah.
I'm glad we're. Let's just do it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the historical narrative, the book of Esther, which is what Project Esther takes its name from, this occurs during this time period where there's a huge amount of Jewish people living in what became the Persian Empire because the Babylonian Empire was overthrown by the Persian. Now, the King Cyrus, there's a prophecy, I think it's in the book of Isaiah, where God says of this king, this coming king, that he's going to raise up this king called Cyrus. And he is going to be the one who issues the decree to allow the Jews to go back to their homeland from exile. And this is what happens in the historical narrative of the Hebrew Bible. According to the narrative, later on, this king called Cyrus comes along and he says, wait a minute, why aren't I allowing these Jewish people to go back to their homeland? So he issues this decree, and that's when they're able to go back, and Jerusalem is in utter ruins. They rebuild the city, they rebuild the temple, which has been smashed and destroyed. And these are the books of Ezra, Nehemiah in the Old Testament, if people want to go look it up, where they talk about coming back from Persia, the Persian Empire, to be able to rebuild the city of Jerusalem and the temple. And they see it as a major fulfillment of biblical prophecy, but that's their spiritual home and their physical home. That's where the Jews, came from. So that's kind of the importance of the Cyrus figure. And so for Trump, it was part of this new apostolic reformation, these sort of apostles and prophets who early on in the Trump, even the run up to the 2015, 2016 election, they said, people like Lance Wallnau, who's a major figure in this NAR movement, he said, Trump is the Cyrus figure. He's going to allow us to take dominion, to go back and seize the land, as it were, and make America a Christian nation again. So people have said, and that's why, Cyrus was not a believer in Yahweh. That's the key to understanding this whole trope. It doesn't have to be a believer. He doesn't have to be. That doesn't matter. It's that God accomplished his purposes through Cyrus for his people, his chosen people. And the Christians would say, it doesn't matter that Trump isn't a Christian. That's immaterial. It's the fact that God is using him to allow us to take dominion of the land of America and turn it into a Christian nation. That's why it's such an important trope. He doesn't have to be a believer at all.
And in fact, the more immoral and off the rails he is, the more they get to double down on this trope, right? On this personification and the whole belief system. So all the tweets and posts and, gnashing of teeth about how can Christians be such hypocrites following this guy, they're not hypocrites in their eyes because of stuff like Cyrus, right? I think there was also I made earlier references in podcasts we've done before where other evangelical groups would compare Trump to King David, right? Who was had some moral flaws, we could say. A few, including adultery and murder and all kinds of horrible things. And they look at Trump and go, well, God speaks through and works through men like this so that we can be saved, right?
Yep. That's the key, because in the book of like I say, the Old Testament book, David was a rapist, and then he had Bathsheba's husband killed. So he had murder, rapist, murderer, and then he covered it all up, and like you say, in the redeeming thing, David wasn't allowed to rebuild the temple, but he designed the temple, and his son Solomon built the temple. So Christians would point to that and say, you see exactly what you just said, Chris, that he is flawed. He was flawed. He was a murderer. He was a rapist, but God forgave him, and look what he was able to accomplish through him. That's the key. So it doesn't matter that Trump, you can, like you say, wail and gnash your teeth. How can you be so hypocritical? They're like, what?
Exactly.
What's the problem?
I'm not hypocrite. You're the one who's off the rails. You just don't get it. Go read your Bible. Don't you understand?
We don't care that Trump is flawed, because the whole thing is, it's all about achieving dominion. And I was reading, and I was doing a bunch of research on Vance Belcher. He was the guy that shot and killed these Minnesota Democratic lawmakers the other day as we're doing this recording. And he was radicalized by the New Apostolic Reformation. And this language is all over this movement. Trump, the Cyrus candidate. Trump, he has this breaker anointing, what they call it. He's coming in to smash things up and disrupt things and break and drain the swamp. And everything he does is unconventional. Of course it is. That's the point. He's God's breaker candidate. He's here to smash and destroy things. And that's what we need in Washington, D.C. And this is what God is doing through a flawed man like Donald Trump.
Well, and that explains so much of how people can support what's going on right now. Smash the Bill of Rights, smash the Constitution, absolutely, because the ends justify the means. It's at the end being revelation and the realization of Jesus coming back, and and all the faithful Christians, I guess floating on up to heaven or something. Whatever view it is that they or interpretation of it they have, and I can speak about it in ridiculing language, but they are very, very serious about this, and there are millions of these people. This is not some shack cult in a swamp in Missouri. These are people who are right now in power in Washington, D.C. I mean, I can't stress enough, the fact that it's a little dangerous to do this podcast these days. I'm not joking about that.
We could be accused of being anti-Semitic, Chris.
Well, exactly.
If we criticize Israel, because
we've already done it. So this is already falling under the umbrella of the current definition of anti-Semitism, right? And of course, I don't have an anti-Semitic bone in my body. I want everybody to have human rights and civil rights and to be able to get along in a world that is peaceful. That's what I want. I don't have religious templates that I lay on top of this about how I'm going to get saved and all you idiots are going to hell or going to burn in eternal fire and brimstone. I don't want that for anybody, but there's a whole swath of people who were raised to believe that is what is an ideal situation for this place. And so if Trump comes with a sledgehammer and busts everything up, it's all good. It's exactly how it's supposed to be, so that we reach our end,
I find it so ironic. I find it so ironic that these evangelicals for so long have been trumpeting the Constitution, the importance of the Constitution. I used to listen to a podcast just to keep up with what these evangelical Christian nationalists are doing. It's called Stand in the Gap Radio, until I just couldn't listen to it anymore. It's just conspiracy theory. But there was always an advertisement that came on where it was a pocket constitution for your Christian, evangelical. And they would say, you need a pocket constitution. It fits in your shirt pocket. This is how important this document is to Christians, they would say. That, Chris, you need to go out and buy your pocket constitution in case anyone comes up to you and challenges you on the street about your rights. You can whip out your pocket constitution as an evangelical and point to literally chapter and verse. And now, like you say, Trump is destroying the Constitution. He's doing away with due process for these immigrants that have been arrested. And evangelicals are cheering him on. They're cheering on Alligator Auschwitz. They're cheering on the fact that he's now arresting Christians in churches that were immigrants who had applied for legal asylum status. And this is the ironic thing. There were some Iranian Christians arrested the other day in California. They had fled Iran for religious persecution grounds. And they were legal asylum seekers in the United States, waiting for a hearing on their status. But they were not in the States illegally. They were arrested by ICE the other day. And I put a post on Threads. I said, Trump evangelicals, how can you be supportive of Christians now being arrested? And the responses I got from evangelicals were shocking. They said, fuck them. If they're here illegally, I don't care if they're in church. I don't care. These people are fake Christians. They're posing as Christians. Screw them. I don't even care. This is coming from evangelicals.
Yeah, it's religious fanaticism, and it's just not too strong a word to use. It just is
radicalization. Or brainwashing, whatever you want to use.
That's right. And And we need to get over the idea that just because we have TVs and radios and cars, that the mindset of people can't go straight to a Crusades mentality of, of conversion by the sword or death to the infidels, or however, whatever view you want to take of it. It is that violence and death are justified in the name of religion. This is an underpinning that is going on in our society right now that has gained a lot of traction, and this administration has basically opened the doors wide for these people. And so I really wanted to lay all that groundwork first. I didn't want to lead to that. I wanted to start with that because I want people to understand what we're dealing with, and where this is coming from, and why people think that, where the anti-Semitism wording is propaganda. It's loading the language, right? And this is Cult 101. I have to stress that, my education in coercive control and my cult background fully inform me of the social and individual psychology of how this works, just like it does with domestic violence and human trafficking. These are the things that my education is right on. So it's all part of the same picture, right? And religious extremism is just another form of or incentive for coercive control on a broad scale, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing a lot of here. And so one of the key elements of propaganda and getting people on board is lying to them and using loaded language, words and emotions and colors and sayings and mantras that people can agree with. You get them on board by saying things they can agree with. You find, the common ground. And anti-Semitism is something that we've been fighting since World War II. Everybody in America was raised to understand that anti-Semitism is one of the most evil things that has ever, dominated this planet as a belief set. That drove World War II and the Holocaust and so many other horrible things in history. And so it's a loaded word. You drop this word and it has a whole set of connotations and ideas that come with it, which is why it was perfect for the Christian Zionists to use it as the sort of, carpet ride to what they want to enact, which is absolute support for Israel, and anyone who has something else to say about it needs to be either gotten rid of by deportation, by arrest, or by violence. That's where this starts, and this Project Esther is the formal, process or policy by which they're doing this. So let's talk about this a little bit more. What's the framework of Project Esther? How are they putting this out there and implementing this?
Well, as I say, okay, we talked about that. It's a policy recommendation paper, and Trump he's by the estimate of the New York Times, he has put into place about half that we know of the recommendations of Project Esther, about 50% so far that we know of. And it's only a 33-page paper. But some of the scary things, I mean, obviously, we're talking about arresting or deporting, detaining foreign students who take part in a rally or a march against Israel or pro-Palestine, faculty members of a university. And what's really frightening, this is what I discovered in further research, they're actually now scouring social media. So, like you said, going back to this podcast, anything we say is now fair game for ICE or the Department of Homeland Security. They can scour our social media feeds. And what I found out, there's another scary aspect to it. They're actually going after Wikipedia editors using facial recognition software, a key recognition for patterns, word patterns, because most Wikipedia editors are anonymous. They use pseudonyms. But now they're saying any Wikipedia editor can be accused of being anti-Semitic if you post anything that's deemed, pro-Palestine or critical of Israel. So they're going after Wikipedia editors using very sophisticated databases and things like that to find you. They will find you. They will weed you out. They will smoke you out. So you could be getting a knock on your door from ICE, getting arrested for something you put on Wikipedia, or you edited something that's considered anti-Semitic. They're going to make you register as a foreign agent if you're a pro-Palestine speaker or something like that. This is going back to 1930s. They used to make German agents, not immigrants, but people who were representatives of the German government before World War II. This was a thing to sort of smoke out, Nazis, and that's what they're using now. And this is just a scary thing, So they're doing it all without due process. You're taking away your constitutional rights, and this is what's happening. And it's like you were saying earlier, it's about the incendiary rhetoric, because you can only demonize people. That's where if you had a Venn diagram, the overlap comes, if you took a guy like Vance Belter, who killed these Democratic lawmakers, and Project Esther, if you put those two circles, the overlap between the two in the diagram is the language in between the two. So you can only call people vermin and animals and scum and, demonic and demonically, led by Satan long enough. And eventually people are going to become radicalized. And that's basically where the two sort of overlap, I think.
Right. Totally. And this is also, of course, we could also call this McCarthyism 2.0.
Yeah, that's what
which
it is.
happened right here for a decade in the United States in the 1950s. This was the era of McCarthyism. I beg you to please look it up if you are not familiar or you're too young to know what the hell I'm talking about. It was an era when the key word wasn't anti-Semitism, it was you're a communist.
Yeah,
if you were a communist, then your rights could be taken away. You could be blackballed in Hollywood or professionally. You could lose your job. You could lose your ability
career
to get a job. Your career was just over.
Yeah.
People's lives were ruined over this.
Oh yeah, and they weren't they weren't communists.
Exactly. I know. It only took the accusation.
Exactly.
All you had to do was point a finger and accuse.
And
let me remind people, L. Ron Hubbard in the 1950s tried to use that exact thing to persecute his enemies who had nothing to do with any of this. He would nope, he's a communist, and he would write to the FBI and say, this guy is a communist, you need to go after him. And the FBI at that time was empowered to do so. And Senator Joseph McCarthy and this whole apparatus took over the United States government for a period of years. And it was just persecution central, and it was a really, really dark time in our history. We remember this with documentaries and with movies and whatnot. You can look this stuff up. It happened. It was real, and people's lives were absolutely ruined. And I dare say it provoked and radicalized people into violence at that time. The idea that it didn't is just ludicrous. So here we have this at scale because of social media and the reach of our electronic digital frontier. These kinds of accusations and these kinds of the implementation of these kind of abuses by the government systems scale up very, very quickly. It's not a local issue. It's not a few people. When you're scouring social media, and I find it hideously ironic that, the people like Mark Zuckerberg, what a year ago was on Joe Rogan, complaining about how, the Biden administration to come after Facebook because of, harmful physical health advice, anti-vax stuff about COVID. Right, and how the government was strong-arming them to take that stuff off of Facebook, and now we have something so much worse, and social media platforms are being utilized to hunt people down, and this is real surveillance state stuff. This is Big Brother stuff now. We're talking pure, unadulterated 1984 stuff. It's happening so fast, and the reason for that is because technology has enabled these folks to do what they're doing so much more efficiently than they could in the 1950s when they had, telegraphs and telephones and typewriters. And that
Yep.
was the speed with which you could get things done, right? As you had to courier things around and stuff. Now you press a button and a million
Click the
people
mouse.
have the document, right? Or whatever it is you're trying to send around.
Yep.
So they've only become more empowered, but it's the same mindset. And that's that's where I'm coming from when I talk about this stuff, is the psychology of it. And that mindset is a radicalized, pro-violence, oppressing mindset, right? Of us versus them. And if you're not with us, you are absolutely against us. And when they are the ones who have the power to imprison people and ruin their lives overnight, that is terrifying. It should be terrifying to every single American.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you took away the name Project Esther and you just said to the average American on the street, are you in favor of taking away people's rights to freedom of assembly, protest, rights to freedom of speech? Are you in favor of people being arrested without a warrant by plainclothes masked people with vehicles that you don't know who they are? They refuse to identify themselves. Are you in favor of not allowing people to have their day in court, regardless of whatever the issue? Everyone should have their chance to argue their case in a court of law. Should they be detained illegally? Should they be deported illegally without due process? Are you in favor of all that? Most Americans, you would hope, would say, good God, no, I don't want any of those things. Then you could turn around and say, okay, Project Esther does all of those things. And in fact, it's doing them right now.
Yep.
And are you okay with that? Because it's actually all those things and more are happening. Like you said, scouring social media, people losing their jobs, their careers at a university, places like Harvard being targeted and their funding being stripped because they quote unquote were too soft on anti-Semitism, because they allowed students at Harvard to stage a protest against Israel or for pro-Palestine protest. And now Trump's going after him. And it's not just Harvard, it's dozens of other universities across the United States under the guise of anti-Semitism. And this is happening right now.
That's right.
And what are we going to do about it?
Exactly. And that really is the key question, is what are we going to do about it? I don't have some 12-step program for y'all as to what to do about this. Right now, all I know how to do is sound the alarm and say, look, I've been in an authoritarian system for decades. I lived it. I know exactly what it looks like. I know what it smells like. And this is it. Everything that's happening right now is what I used to live in. When I was in the Sea Org, you had no rights. The Bill of Rights was a joke. Nobody even talked about it. It wasn't even on anybody's mind because our mission was so much more important, and people's rights didn't matter squat because of, how religiously fanatical we were about our crusade. So I've been in that mindset, and I escaped from it and recovered from it. And now I'm watching it take over our country. And frankly, it's terrifying. And I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in this at all. I just happen to have that unique experience. A lot of people can see what's going on, and they are speaking up against it. You had a number of quotes throughout your paper on this from various news articles and media personalities and professionals in Jewish institutions and media watch institutions who were sounding the alarm. Like, look, this is McCarthyism 2.0. This is the government way overstepping and really ignoring the First Amendment, the second, the Fourth Amendment, right? Just ignoring it. And right now, unfortunately, we have an administration that, speaking a little bit more broadly, but right on point, we have an administration, an executive branch, who blatantly ignores court orders, because there have been justices and judges who have been trying to push back, and they're being and they just either ignore it straight out, or they play footsies with it and use legal shenanigans, just like the Church of Scientology does. Right? You can use legal shenanigans with high-priced, high-powered government attorneys to delay, to introduce nonsensical arguments while people are in prison and have no right to fight back. And the government just does all the tricks to hold the courts at bay. And the eventual place that goes, and if you look into history, is that the courts are dismantled. So,
Yeah.
this all goes in very, very predictable directions, right? And so
Yeah.
we're still in a place right now. Now, having said all of that, okay, and laid all this horror story out, okay, and this is one part of a broader picture. It's not too late to stop these things. These people do not have ultimate power yet. They do not have the ability to spy out every single person and ferret out, nor the manpower to ferret out every single resistor or every single person who has something to say about this. There are more and more and more Americans every day seeing what is going on and seeing that there is a class war here, on the socioeconomic side. But I wanted to also point out today that there's also a religious war being fought right in plain sight, that if you don't know what you're looking at, you won't see it, because you won't recognize what all these signs are. And the hypocrisy, for example, of the Christians involved in this is what I'm talking about. It's right there.
Yeah,
but they don't explain themselves to you. They just laugh at you and think you're an idiot, while they're going to go be saved, And
well, they don't need to.
Yeah, they don't need to. Exactly.
I'm going to heaven, and you're going to hell.
No obligation at all, right?
Because
you're just a sinner.
Saying, we're all sinners bound for hell. Well, going back to your comment about the Jewish groups that I discovered, the Jewish advocacy groups, the reason they're so amped up about this is they say it's actually bad for Jews, Project Esther. You wouldn't think that, because it's all about anti-Semitism. They're saying, wait a minute, no, because the second you take away our right to protest, peacefully protest, the second you take away our rights to freedom of speech, and you're going to start arresting and detaining people, at what point is that going to start happening to Jews? And as the famous poem says, if no one spoke out, eventually there's no one to speak out for you either. When they finally come for you, said Pastor Niemoller, there was nobody left to speak out for me, but he hadn't spoken out for anybody. And this is the other key thing, we haven't talked about this, is that Project Esther completely ignores actual anti-Semitic groups. And these Jewish advocates are like, okay, hang on a minute. You want to be against anti-Semitism? Okay. Go after the fucking Ku Klux Klan. Go after the neo-Nazis. Go after the white supremacists. Those guys are clearly anti-Semitic, and there's nothing in Project Esther about that. But they're going to arrest some foreign student who goes to a pro-Palestine march, and they're going to disappear her off the streets and deport that person because she's anti-Semitic. And yet these neo-Nazis can march down the street with swastikas and chanting, "Jews will not replace us" in Charlottesville, and nothing. Crickets from
very fine Esther. People.
Very fine. And then people. Trump can say, well, they were very fine people on both sides.
That's right. And
so the Jewish groups are like, what?
Exactly. Because again, Trump is not a principled person. Let's not even I don't even mean to put that there. Like Trump is some rabid anti-Semite. Trump isn't anything except Trump. That's all Trump is about.
I think he is a racist, though. That's pretty clear. He has a long history of.
He's every ist you can imagine, but he's just but he's not a man of principle. Is the point, right? His world is one of impulse after impulse after impulse, and that's how he navigates his life. So it's not
transactional.
Very. So there's no 4D chess going on here.
Yeah.
There's no long-term strategy in his mind. There's no, I can't wait, for the Constitution to be torn apart, so I'll be king. It's not even that involved. Or strategic. It's just he's just going minute to minute, day to day. Just give me my narcissistic supply, right? It's the people under him. And if you do start looking into authoritarian history, and we always jump to the Nazis, but you can jump to any period of history, you will find that these dictator types are not the managers of their organizations. They are the figureheads and leaders, and provide the symbolism and the wordage and the inspiration. But it's the Stephen Millers and Victoria Coates of the world who are actually doing the work. And they are people of principle, and we've described some of their principles today. And I hope you find it as disturbing as I do, because these are people whose moral plane is the complete opposite of, and very. Let me just make this point as well. Incredibly un-American.
Yeah.
This is not what
Anti-democratic.
America's about.
Yeah.
You know, this is the most un-American movement, political ideological movement that has ever been in control of our country, and the Christian nationalists are. You know, when they were walking around with their pocket constitutions and stuff, that's because it's all about a Christian nation, see? And we got to build up this Christian nation and get as many people on board with Christianity as we can, so that when this coming apocalypse occurs, you know, there's going to be so many of us marching on up to heaven. And now they see that is they think that's what's happening. And they want to make it happen. They want to push for it to happen. And this is what is behind so many of these draconian measures that we're seeing now carried out by a very willing set of government agents who probably are absolutely clueless about what they're doing, and why they're doing it. You know, they're just thugs who get away with being thugs. And as far as and I'm talking here at the individual, you know, ICE level or, you know, agent level, that this is not, they're not all on board with this, you know, Christian national. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This is a nuanced, multi-layered thing. But when the people in charge have a core set of beliefs that is actively destructive to our entire way of life, there's gonna be consequences to that. You know,
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I've been watching The Handmaid's Tale. I've been forcing myself to keep going, not because it's not good, but because it's very triggering to me as an ex-evangelical, and exactly in the context of what you've just been describing. Because there was a seismic shift when I was an evangelical growing up in church back in the 70s and 80s. We were trying to save the world, kind of like your mission was, Scientology was to clear the world. Christian, we wanted to evangelize the world, to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to as many people as we could, convince them to become a Christian, and like you said, take as many people to heaven with us as we could. That has changed. Now, the people that are in charge of the Trump evangelical side, which is basically taking over the Republican Party, they've said, okay, we're dispensing with all that. Like you just said, what this is about now is taking dominion. We are going to take, I was reading, there's a thing called the Watchman Decree. This was put out by a guy named Dutch Sheets, who was a big Christian nationalist and NAR apostle. And one of the statements in it was he does this at every one of his big conferences. He reads it and has people say it with him, thousands of people chanting this Watchman Decree. One of the things was, we declare something like, we will take over, permanently control all aspects of government from here on out. That permanent control. We're going to take over, and we're never going to relinquish it. And this is the goal of Christian nationalism. They don't want to see as many people saved. They just want to make America a Christian nation, which is becoming Gilead. That's right. Exactly what's happening. That's why it's so triggering for me to watch A Handmaid's Tale, because I'm like, these people are applying the Old Testament law. So if you get caught having an affair, you'll be killed. You and the woman or man, whoever you're having an affair with. If you're gay, you're a gender traitor, you're going to be hanging on the wall outside the city. And that's what the Old Testament said. And that's what these people are advocating. They're making abortion illegal, and they're going to make it more draconian. And now we got Project Esther. And this is a result of Christian nationalism.
Man, and I encourage everybody who's watching this, who's thinking or rolling their eyes or thinking, come on, what are you guys talking about? Go look it up.
What are you smoking?
Go look it up, right? I'll put some links below to get you started. But this is all out there. This isn't. I didn't dream all this up. This isn't my brainchild. It's not Clint's. We didn't imagine all of this. And we're not connecting dots that don't connect. This is not conspiracy theory, where we're having to make leaps of logic that don't leap. These are all the words of the people. We're quoting these people. We're talking about what they actually believe, right? And what they've put out in government level papers. I mean, it's on the internet. You can look up Project Esther as a website.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Out there. Yeah, you can read the paper.
Yeah, you can just read it for yourself, and then do. There's a Wikipedia page. There's news articles about this. There are Jewish groups, and as well as individual Jewish people who have been blogging and saying this isn't this isn't fighting anti-Semitism. This is
Yeah.
anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
This is the worst. I mean, this stuff is horrible. And it doesn't help us at all. And the ultimate irony, of course, is, as you pointed out here, you know, in the name of fighting anti-Semitism, they'll arrest and deport and commit violence against Jewish people.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the Jewish community who should be most alarmed about this, because it's a complete corruption of, the mission to never again. Remember that mantra:
Yeah.
never again, never forget. Well, a lot of people have forgotten and
Yeah.
are enacting a whole new, version of the awful things that we've had before. So enough soapboxing, but I just got to get some of this off my chest. And Clint,
Yeah.
you've done a really good job here today
Well,
of letting us know about this. Now, what else are there more points
oh
to
yeah,
this that I'm?
there's so
Yeah,
much
tell
more.
me
But
more.
well,
Bring
I
it,
was going
bring
to
it.
say one other aspect of this I found quite interesting is that there are a number of people in Trump's officials who have been identified as anti-Semitic. So this is so ironic. And in the MAGA world, there's a growing movement of social media influencers who are clearly anti-Semitic, posting white nationalist things on social media, saying horrific things about Jews, and these are Trump supporters. And I found really interesting. I made a list of all the known Trump officials who have said or been identified with white supremacists and said anti-Semitic things on social, and they've got positions in Trump's cabinets and high positions, not just underlings. We're talking high profile positions who are clearly anti-Semitic. And again, Project Esther says nothing about those people because they work for Trump. You
That's
know,
right. Well, what was the line that they got? Because somebody in the administration was asked about this, right? When you pointed out the thing about, hey,
yeah,
wait a minute, how come you guys aren't going after the KKK or the neo Nazis or something? What was the response?
yeah. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, "Well, white supremacists aren't my problem because they're not part of conservatism. They're essentially not my problem." And
Right,
this is the guy who's the head of the anti-Semitism aspect of Project Esther. And
right.
they're like, why aren't you going after these white supremacists and neo Nazis? Hey, that's not my problem. Literally,
Uh,
that's
uh,
what he said.
yeah, you just go, wow. Again, hypocrisy
Really?
is the order of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but not in their minds, because they're on a mission. And that mission has just like when I was in Scientology, I get the mindset, right? It has the road has very narrow parameters,
Yeah.
and this is what we're doing. And anybody who has something to say about it, if I can't take you out of my way, I'm going to obfuscate and confuse you
Yeah.
to just
Gaslight.
push you aside,
Yeah.
so I can just get done what I need to get done. That's the dangerous kind of person, right? Trump is a bull in a china shop, a random destroyer of things, the orange wrecking ball, as they've said. But he's not a man on a mission, right? But these people are, and that's where intelligence and immorality come together, right? And make horrible things happen. So,
Yeah.
okay. So, Clint, are there other points about this that we have? No, I
There's
think we kind
well,
of
yeah, I think
cored
we
it out, huh?
I mean, there's more that we could talk about, but I'm really concerned. I keep pushing these episodes back because I mentioned Vance Belter and things like that. I did a deep dive into him. It's an hour and a half episode that's coming out. Well, tomorrow, as I don't know when this episode drops, but it's
Mm-hmm.
coming out soon. If you want to look that up on my platform, which is the Dismantling Doctrine podcast, because it's kind of like this Project Esther thing. The more I researched on him and his radicalization by the New Apostolic Reformation, and as you said, these are the people that are in Trump's orbit, these evangelicals that are
Yeah.
influencing him. These are the people that work at the Heritage Foundation. These are the people holding these massive rallies. These were the ones behind the January 6th riots. This is a radical Christian, like you say, religious movement. And that's radicalization. So there's a definite overlap between this world and guys like Vance Belter and Project Esther.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. And in terms of the I mean, I'll just throw this out there as the last little zinger, I suppose. But I'm all about history. I'm all about how history rhymes, history echoes. It doesn't repeat as such. It's not a carbon copy. It never is. Circumstances and context change. But for those who are keen on the religious legacy and founding of America, I'll turn you back to Arthur Miller's play, which was written during McCarthyism, called The Crucible, about what? The Salem witch hunts. Right, and the deaths of people over religious belief and religious persecution. Right here, at the beginning, founding of this country. So in a lot of ways, this kind of thinking is really part of the fabric of our country. And it's been this sort of dark underbelly of it from the get-go, right? Is this sort of religious fanaticism that can overtake people. I'm not anti-religion. I am anti-religious fanaticism. And I've tried every single time I bring this stuff up to make that point. Some people can hear it. The more fanatical you are, the more you can't hear that. Because the world becomes very black and white to you when you become a fanatic. Again, I've lived it. Clint's lived it. We understand. We get it. It's binary thinking, right? It's either you're with us or you're against us. You're a believer or you're a sinner. And when your world view is that has been stupefied to that level, then you're not capable of nuanced thinking anymore. And that's a horrible, horrible place to be. I don't want that to spread around any more than it already has. So know your enemy, know what's going on out there. This is part of it. This is not the whole picture by any stretch, but this is a key part of what's going on out there. And Clint, I really want to thank you again for bringing all this to my attention and kind of, hey, let's do some stuff on this, right? Because this is important stuff, and it's all part of the picture of what I've been trying to sound the alarm bells on since 2016. Of, hey, these people do things that lead to really, really dark places, and here we are, right?
Absolutely.
So, all right. I will put the links to Clint's show and the other things in the description section below, so you can check them out for yourself. I encourage you to do so. Clint, thanks again. And folks out there, see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Chris. Take care.